Verified department records. Genuine field evidence. Unbiased justice. Welcome to Bodycam Incident Reports.
Hey! Step away from the vehicle.
Is there a problem, officer?
I said step away from the car. I need to see some ID.
Officer, I'm standing next to my own vehicle. What exactly is your suspicion?
You fit the description. ID. Now.
Officer Kyle Bennett thought he was handling a routine disturbance. He thought he was taking down an arrogant suspect who refused to follow orders in a busy parking lot. He thought he was showing the crowd who was in charge. He had absolutely no idea that the man he was shoving against the cold metal of a black Audi Q8 was Judge Marcus Sterling, a sitting federal judge for the Northern District of Illinois, a man who had spent the last 22 years presiding over federal grand juries, sentencing organized crime bosses and, ironically, ruling on civil rights lawsuits against police departments. The man in the handcuffs wasn't a criminal, he was the law. And Officer Bennett was about to learn a lesson that would cost the city nearly $1 million and spark a federal investigation. Before we dive into how a Saturday shopping trip turned into a national scandal, I need you to do something. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe that a badge shouldn't grant immunity from stupidity, hit that subscribe button. This story is going to make your blood boil. Marcus Sterling was not a man who blended in. At 58 years old, he carried himself with the heavy, deliberate gravity of someone used to having the final word. He was known in the Chicago legal community as the Scalpel, precise, cold, and utterly intolerant of sloppy procedure. He had thrown prosecutors out of his courtroom for lesser errors than what was about to happen to him. That Saturday afternoon, the Scalpel was off duty. He was at the Oakbrook Center, an upscale open-air mall just outside Chicago. The weather was crisp, the sun was shining, and the parking lot was packed with holiday shoppers. Sterling was wearing a thick wool coat and a scarf, loading shopping bags into the trunk of his black Audi Q8. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't lurking. He was doing exactly what thousands of other people were doing, preparing to go home. But to Officer Kyle Bennett, a 5-year veteran with a history of aggressive stops that his supervisors had conveniently ignored, Sterling didn't look like a shopper. He looked like a suspect. Bennett had received a dispatch call moments earlier. It was a vague, useless tip from a nervous passerby. Suspicious black male, large build, looking into windows of expensive cars. There was no description of criminal behavior, no report of a break-in, just a bias-fueled assumption. When Bennett rolled his cruiser down the aisle and saw Sterling standing next to the $90,000 SUV, he didn't check the license plate. If he had, he would have seen the vehicle was registered to a federal official. Instead, Bennett saw an opportunity to be a hero. He slammed his cruiser into park, blocking the Audi, and stepped out. "Hey, step away from the vehicle!" Bennett shouted, hand resting on his belt. Sterling didn't flinch. He didn't drop his bags in terror. He calmly placed the last gift box in the trunk, hit the button to close the automatic hatch, and turned around. He saw the officer, he saw the aggression, and he immediately switched into courtroom mode. "Is there a problem, officer?" Sterling asked. His voice wasn't shaky. It was the voice that silenced courtrooms. "I said step away from the car. I need to see some ID," Bennett commanded, moving into Sterling's personal space. Sterling stood his ground. He didn't retreat. He looked around at the shoppers walking by, ensuring he had an audience. "Officer, I am standing next to my own vehicle," Sterling said, loudly enough for a couple loading their Tesla 2 spots away to hear. "You are detaining me. Under Terry versus Ohio, you are required to articulate a reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. What is your suspicion?" Bennett froze for a microsecond. He wasn't used to suspects citing Supreme Court case law. He was used to fear, and Sterling wasn't afraid. This bruised Bennett's ego instantly. "I'm investigating a report of a suspicious person casing vehicles," Bennett snapped. "And right now, you're fitting the description. Give me your ID or you're going in for obstruction." "I am not obstructing," Sterling announced, turning his head slightly to address the teenager who had just started filming on an iPhone. "I am asserting my rights. Walking while black is not a crime, officer. But since you seem determined to escalate this..." Sterling reached into his coat pocket slowly. Deliberate movements. "I am reaching for my wallet. I am going to show you my identification so you can see exactly how big of a mistake you are making." Bennett snatched the wallet from Sterling's hand. He flipped it open. Inside, next to the driver's license, was the silver and gold shield. The text was clear. "United States District Judge." Bennett looked at the badge. Then he looked at Sterling. Then he looked at the crowd. A dozen people had stopped. 3 phones were recording. Bennett felt the heat rising in his neck. He knew deep down that he might have messed up, but he had already committed. If he backed down now, after being lectured by a suspect in front of an audience, he would look weak. He would look like he lost control. His ego made the decision for him. "This is fake," Bennett declared loud enough for the camera to pick up. "You printed this off the internet." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "I assure you, officer, that is federal property." "It's a forgery," Bennett doubled down, panic and arrogance mixing in his voice. "And you're impersonating a federal official. Turn around." "You are making a choice right now," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "Once those cuffs go on, there is no going back. You will not have qualified immunity." "Hands behind your back, now!" Bennett grabbed Sterling's wrist and twisted. The click of the handcuffs was audible over the wind. The crowd gasped. "He showed you his ID!" someone yelled from the sidewalk. "I got it all on video!" another voice shouted. Sterling didn't struggle. He allowed himself to be manhandled toward the patrol car. He knew the law better than anyone on that pavement. He knew that the moment Bennett locked those cuffs based on a refusal to accept valid credentials, the officer had sealed his own fate. Bennett shoved the judge into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was cold. As Bennett slammed the door, Sterling looked through the wire mesh. He saw the witnesses still filming. He nodded once, acknowledging them. The engine roared to life. Bennett was driving fast, adrenaline pumping, thinking he had just caught a con artist with a fake badge. He had no idea that he was driving a federal judge to his own precinct, where the shift commander, a veteran sergeant who knew a real federal SEAL when he saw one, was currently drinking coffee, waiting for the shift to end. The drive would take 15 minutes. It would be the last 15 minutes of Officer Bennett's career, as he knew it. The drive to the precinct took 14 minutes. They were the longest 14 minutes of Officer Bennett's life, though he didn't know it yet. He turned up the radio to drown out the silence. In the back seat, Judge Sterling said absolutely nothing. He didn't scream. He didn't kick the door. He sat perfectly still, staring at the back of Bennett's head. He was already drafting the federal complaint in his mind. Count 1, unlawful detention. Count 2, false arrest. Count 3, violation of civil rights under color of law. Bennett glanced in the rearview mirror. "You know, you could have just listened," he muttered. "You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes." Sterling didn't blink. "Officer," he said calmly, "ensure your body camera remains active. I want your commentary on the record." Bennett scoffed. He pulled into the station garage. He hauled Sterling out of the car and marched him through the back entrance. They passed other officers. Some looked confused. They saw a man in a $2,000 coat and Italian leather shoes and handcuffs. This didn't look like a vagrant. This didn't look like a criminal. Bennett pushed Sterling toward the processing desk. Sitting there was Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, 20 years on the force. He had seen every lie, every scam, and every fake ID in Chicago. He looked up from his computer. "What do we have?" "Disorderly conduct, resisting, and impersonating a federal official," Bennett announced loudly. He tossed Sterling's wallet onto the counter. "Guy was making a scene at the mall, flashed a fake badge to try and get out of it." Sterling spoke up. His voice filled the room. I am Marcus Sterling. I am a United States District Judge. I am being held unlawfully." Rodriguez paused. The room went quiet. He looked at Bennett. Then he looked at the man in handcuffs. "He's full of it, Sarge," Bennett laughed nervously. "Look at the ID. It's a prop." Rodriguez reached out. He picked up the leather wallet. He didn't run it through the computer yet. He didn't need to. He felt the weight of the brass badge. He ran his thumb over the raised seal. He tilted the ID card under the fluorescent light. The holographic eagle shimmered perfectly. Rodriguez knew what a fake looked like. Fakes were light. Fakes were blurry. This was heavy. This was sharp. This was real. His stomach dropped. He looked at the name again. Marcus Sterling. He didn't know the face, but he knew the name. Everyone in law enforcement knew the name. Rodriguez stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He looked at Bennett with eyes wide with horror. "Bennett," he whispered, "where did you arrest him?" "Oakbrook parking lot. I told you he—" "Uncuff him." "What?" "I said uncuff him. Right now." Bennett froze. "Sarge, he's a suspect. The ID is fake." "It's not fake, you idiot," Rodriguez roared. "This is a federal credential. This is a sitting federal judge." The station stopped. Every officer in the room turned to look. Bennett's face went pale. The arrogance evaporated. "But I thought—" "You didn't think," Rodriguez shouted, coming around the desk. "Give me the keys." Rodriguez grabbed the keys from Bennett's shaking hand. He unlocked the cuffs himself. Sterling rubbed his wrists. He looked at Rodriguez. "Thank you, Sergeant. I assume the captain is in?" "Yes, Your Honor. Immediately, Your Honor." "Good. I want him here, and I want the city attorney on the phone." Bennett backed away. He looked at the judge. He looked at his sergeant. And for the first time, he realized the magnitude of what he had done. But it was too late. The phone on the sergeant's desk started ringing, then the other line, then a cell phone. The video from the parking lot had just gone viral. The video hit Twitter at 4:12 p.m. It was uploaded by the kid in the Tesla. The caption was simple: "Chicago PD arrests federal judge for shopping while black. Watch until the end." By the time Captain Miller stormed into the precinct, the clip had 300,000 views. By the time he reached his office, it had crossed 1 million. The comment section was a war zone. He showed his ID and they still cuffed him? That officer is finished. I know that parking lot. I know that cop. He did this to my brother last year. Inside the captain's office, the air was thin. Officer Bennett stood in the corner. He wasn't smirking anymore. He looked like a child who had just broken a priceless vase. Judge Sterling sat in a leather chair across from the captain's desk. He was rubbing his wrists. He was calm, terrifyingly calm. Captain Miller watched the video on his tablet. He watched Bennett approach the Audi. He watched Sterling ask for the reason for the stop. He watched Sterling hand over the credentials. He watched Bennett throw them aside and call them fake. Miller paused the video. He took off his glasses. He looked at Bennett. "You told me he was resisting," Miller said. His voice was dangerously quiet. He was being difficult, sir," Bennett stammered. "He was challenging my authority in front of the crowd." "He was challenging your stupidity," Miller snapped. He turned the tablet around. "He was standing still. His hands were visible. He gave you his ID. It looked fake, Captain. I've never seen a federal ID like that." "That's because you've never arrested a federal judge before," Miller shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just violate policy. You violated the Constitution on camera." Sterling cleared his throat. Both police officers froze. "Captain Miller," Sterling said, "I'm not interested in your internal discipline right now. That will come later." "Judge Sterling, I can't apologize enough," Miller began. "We are going to release you immediately. We'll expunge the arrest record tonight." "No," Sterling said. The word hung in the air. "You won't expunge anything. I want that arrest record preserved. I want it printed. I want the timestamps." Sterling stood up. I want the body camera footage downloaded and secured on a separate drive. I want the dash cam footage, and I want the dispatch log for the suspicious person call. Bennett shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I can write a supplementary report. You will write nothing, Sterling cut him off. Anything you write now is an attempt to cover your tracks. You have the right to remain silent, Officer Bennett. I suggest you use it. Sterling walked to the window. Outside, 3 news vans had already pulled up. Reporters were setting up cameras on the precinct steps. The viral video had done its work. The media smelled blood. This isn't going away, Captain, Sterling said, watching the cameras. You have a systemic problem in this district. I've seen the cases come across my bench. Vague stops, escalation, qualified immunity claims. He turned back to face them. Tonight, the immunity ends. Miller looked at his phone. The mayor was calling. Again. What do you want, Judge? Miller asked, defeated. I want my property returned. I want to leave through the front door. And I want you to know that when I file my suit on Monday, I will be naming Officer Bennett individually. Bennett swallowed hard. He had thought the worst thing that could happen was getting fired. He was wrong. He was about to lose his house, his pension, and his future. Sterling walked out of the office. He collected his wallet and keys from a pale-faced Sergeant Rodriguez. He walked to the front doors of the station. He pushed them open. The flash of camera bulbs was blinding. The reporters shouted questions. Judge Sterling, was it racially motivated? Judge, are you suing the city? Sterling stopped. He looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a verdict. And Officer Bennett, watching from the window upstairs, knew it was over. Monday morning arrived like a sledgehammer for the Chicago Police Department. At 9 a.m. sharp, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the city attorney's office. It wasn't a press release. It was a federal lawsuit. Sterling versus City of Chicago, et al. It was 35 pages of legal scorched earth. Judge Sterling hadn't hired an outside firm. He wrote it himself. Every paragraph was a nail in the coffin of Officer Bennett's career. He cited the Fourth Amendment violations. He cited the false imprisonment. But then he went deeper. Sterling requested the disciplinary records of Officer Bennett. He requested the stop and frisk data for the entire 11th District for the last 5 years. He wasn't just suing for a bad Saturday afternoon. He was putting the entire department on trial. By noon, the city attorney was in the police chief's office. We have to settle, the attorney said, throwing the lawsuit on the desk. He's asking for everything, and he's going to get it. The chief rubbed his temples. We can't just roll over. The union will riot. The union won't do a damn thing, the attorney snapped. Have you seen the internal affairs report on Bennett? The chief opened the file. Internal affairs usually moved at a glacial pace. Not this time. With the national media camped on their lawn, they had audited Bennett's history in 48 hours. The results were damning. In 5 years, Officer Kyle Bennett had conducted 400 suspicious person stops. 85% of those stopped were African American or Latino. Less than 2% resulted in a citation or arrest that stuck. There were 12 previous complaints for excessive force and rudeness. Every single one had been dismissed by his supervisors as unfounded. He's a liability factory, the attorney said, and Sterling knows it. If this goes to discovery, if Sterling gets to depose Bennett under oath, he will tear the entire department apart. At 2 p.m., Officer Kyle Bennett was summoned to headquarters. He walked in wearing a suit, his union representative by his side. He thought he was going to get a suspension, maybe desk duty until the heat died down. He walked into the conference room and saw the chief, the deputy chief, and the head of HR. There was no coffee. There were no pleasantries. Officer Bennett, the chief said, we have reviewed the body camera footage and compared it to your initial incident report. Bennett swallowed. Sir, I wrote what I perceived at the time. You wrote that the suspect was aggressive and non-compliant, the chief read from the paper. The video shows him standing still with his hands visible. You wrote that he refused to identify himself. The video shows him handing you his ID. You wrote that the ID appeared fraudulent. It is a standard federal issue. The chief closed the folder. You lied in an official report, Bennett. That's a Brady violation. Your credibility in court is dead. You can never testify in another case again. Bennett looked at his union rep. The rep just stared at the floor. There was no defense for this. Not with 10 million views on Twitter. You are hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately, the chief said. Terminated? Bennett's voice cracked. But I have a mortgage. You should have thought about that before you put handcuffs on a federal judge because your ego got bruised, the chief said coldly. Turn in your badge and gun. Escort him out. Bennett walked out of headquarters, a civilian. But the bleeding didn't stop there. The next day, a letter arrived from Washington, D.C. It was from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Based on the viral video and the allegations in Sterling's lawsuit, the DOJ was opening a pattern or practice investigation into the Chicago Police Department. They weren't just looking at Bennett anymore. They were coming for the supervisors who ignored the complaints. They were coming for the training protocols. They were coming for the data. Judge Sterling sat in his home study, watching the news. The Chiron on CNN read, DOJ probes Chicago. PD after judge arrest. He took a sip of tea. His phone rang. It was the city attorney. Judge Sterling, the voice was nervous. We've seen the complaint. We want to talk settlement. We want to avoid a trial. Sterling leaned back in his chair. I'm listening, he said. But you should know, the price has gone up. The settlement meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of City Hall. There were no handshakes. The city attorney slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table. $500,000, the attorney said, and a non-disclosure agreement. You drop the suit, we pay the money, and nobody talks about this again. Judge Sterling didn't even look at the paper. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. There will be no non-disclosure agreement, Sterling said. The public has a right to know exactly what their tax dollars are paying for. He turned back to the lawyers. And the number is $850,000. The city attorney balked. That's exorbitant for a 20-minute detention with no physical injury. I wasn't detained for 20 minutes, Sterling corrected him sharply. I was detained for being black in a zip code your officer didn't think I belonged in. The injury isn't physical, it's constitutional. He leaned forward. Pay it, or I will depose every supervisor in the 11th District live on cable news. They paid it. The check arrived 2 weeks later. The media speculated on what the judge would do with the windfall. A vacation home? A new car? Retirement? Sterling called a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse. He held the check up for the cameras. This check represents the cost of bias, Sterling told the crowd of reporters. But justice shouldn't have a price tag. He handed the check to a woman standing next to him. She was the director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I am donating the entire settlement, $850,000, to the LDF, Sterling announced, to establish a new task force specifically designed to defend citizens who were stopped without reasonable suspicion. The crowd went silent, then erupted in applause. The system worked for me, Sterling continued, his voice wavering slightly for the first time. But only because I had a federal badge in my pocket. Justice cannot depend on who you know or what credentials you carry. It must be blind. The impact of that Saturday afternoon rippled out for years. Officer Kyle Bennett never worked in law enforcement again. He applied for private security jobs, but a simple Google search of his name brought up the viral video. He became unhireable. He eventually moved out of state, a cautionary tale for every rookie cop in the Midwest. The Chicago Police Department wasn't so lucky. The DOJ investigation, triggered by Sterling's arrest, resulted in a federal consent decree. It forced the department to overhaul its training. It mandated body cameras for every officer at all times. It created a new civilian oversight board with the power to fire officers like Bennett before they make headlines. And the Oakbrook Center parking lot, it's still busy, but now, when officers patrol it, they check the license plate before they assume the worst. They remember the man in the wool coat. They remember the cost of assumption. Judge Sterling returned to the bench. He didn't talk about the incident much in private, but lawyers noticed a change in his courtroom. When prosecutors presented suspicious person stops as evidence, Sterling scrutinized them with surgical precision. He demanded the footage. He demanded the facts. He made sure that the Constitution stopped at the street level, not just the courtroom door. This story matters because it proves that accountability is possible. It proves that a camera phone and a knowledge of your rights are the most powerful weapons you have against injustice. But it also asks a hard question. What would have happened if Marcus Sterling had been a plumber, or a teacher, or a student? Would he be $850,000 richer? Or would he be in a jail cell with a criminal record? That is the question we still need to answer. What is your biggest takeaway from this story? Do you think the settlement was enough, or should the supervisors have been fired too? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story opened your eyes to how quickly a normal day can turn into a nightmare, share it with someone who needs to see it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, know your rights, and see you in the next one.
This concludes today's report. To access more official footage, please like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.